All right. Hopefully everybody can hear this. If not, we're just gonna. I've had a lot of technical issues. I'm trying something different today, so the color is terrible. I apologize for that. But we're gonna try this, see if it's a little easier for me to record and for you all to watch. So today we're going to be talking about eating disorders. We're going to chapter 8 of your textbook talks about both eating disorders and sleep disorders. We're going to talk a little bit about eating disorders today. We're not going to talk about sleep disorders. And in addition, this is going to be a fairly short lecture. What I want to spend the bulk of the time on is I want to have you all watch a documentary. There's a really great documentary that I've shown in class over a few years and usually get good feedback on it. It's called Dying to Be Thin, so I'm going to post a link to that. And a lot of the assignment for the week, also some of the information from the tests in this particular section will be things that are covered in that video. So please make sure to spend some time on that. Look it over. It's about an hour. So I think it's well worth the time and certainly very informative. I can talk about this all day long. I can read you what your textbook says or have you read the textbook. The fact of the matter is these are very difficult disorders, and the benefit of some of the videos, documentaries like Dying to Be Thin and some of the others that are out there are that you get to see firsthand accounts. You get to see people who are struggling with it, and I think that's far more valuable than anything I can tell you. I'll say just on the front end, these are some of the more difficult disorders to treat. They tend to sort of be lifelong, not necessarily saying that a person is having symptoms of anorexia or bulimia or obesity for the entirety of their life. They might have active symptoms, but it's always a struggle. It's very these types of behaviors and maladaptive behaviors, maladaptive ways of looking at food tend to start at a very young age. Often in our teenage years, even earlier adolescence, go into adulthood. And for many folks, this continues on throughout the life. Even if they have symptoms under control, they still struggle with how they view the relationship that we have with food. There's a lot of factors that go into play here that are probably unique to these topics. If not unique to these topics, then certainly more important and more obvious when we're dealing with some of the eating disorders. First is just how society views relationship with food. Think about food now versus food when our great grandparents or even our grandparents were younger. We can pretty much have any food we want. I have probably no fewer than 3 apps on my phone where I can order any food that I want from any restaurant I want, and they will deliver it to my house. I don't even have to get up off the couch. We have a strange relationship with food. It's easy to get. The food that we can get isn't necessarily healthy. So that factors into it. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So what we're going to start with is talking a little bit about the types of eating disorders, some of the causes of eating disorders, and a little bit about how we treat that. We'll touch on obesity because that is, we've all known that it's in the same vein as these other eating disorders for a long time, but we're starting to get more recognition of this as being disordered. So we'll talk about obesity as we go through as well. In the DSM-5, we have 2 major types of eating disorders, and you've probably heard these before. In the video that I'm going to post, you'll see a a particular young lady, but also a group of women who are struggling with anorexia nervosa, probably the eating disorder that most people are familiar with. We also have bulimia nervosa, which is, and generally refer to these as just anorexia and bulimia. So you've surely heard of them before. And they are really severe disruptions in our eating behavior. And they're marked by sort of this inappropriate fixation on weight and inappropriate fixation on food. So also, just again, the cultural influences can't be overlooked. We sort of, our Western culture has a very strange focus on food. We have, as I said earlier, the availability of food. It's very available. It tastes really good. It's not, a lot of the food that we can get that's cheap and available isn't particularly nutritious. You can go to McDonald's and get a lot of food for a little bit of money, and it's not really good for you, but we like it. It tastes good. It's full of sugar and things like that. And that undoubtedly feeds into some of the problem behavior that we have when we're dealing with eating. Let's see here. Right. So we'll start with bulimia nervosa. And the hallmark here is binge eating. Excessive amounts of food in a relatively short amount of time. Usually it's high calorie food, not necessarily healthy food. So junk food, potato chips and chocolate and things like that, ice cream, things that you can eat a lot of that taste really good. And the eating is perceived as being uncontrollable. So like I can't, when I'm having one of these episodes, I can't just stop eating. You just eat despite the fact that you're not really full or that you're not really hungry. You eat past the point of satiation, easy for me to say, right? And it's associated with a lot of guilt, shame, remorse. And usually this is a hidden behavior. This is something that people don't share with others. And so unlike anorexia, bulimia is a little easier to cover up. This often goes unnoticed, at least for a long time. As I mentioned, the foods are high fat, high sugar, high carbs. Also probably are more likely to taste good. And so this is followed, the binging is followed by compensatory behaviors designed to make up for the binge eating. Most commonly is purging. So essentially throwing up the food that you've consumed. And usually this is sort of self-induced. And you also have people who do other compensatory behaviors like using laxatives or diuretics to help burn off the food. Excessive exercise, hours and hours like on a treadmill after you eat. And then followed by periods of fasting. So this cycle goes something like fasting for long periods of time, not having any food or very little food, and then consuming a whole lot of high calorie dense food within a very short time, throwing that up, excessive exercise, whatever the compensatory behavior is, then you repeat that cycle again and again. As I mentioned, hiding this from family is usually pretty common. Not a lot of people who are struggling with bulimia are going around advertising that they are. So most are within 10% of normal body weight. This is a little different than anorexia, where it's more obvious that there is a significant change in body weight. And often the folks that are struggling with that, particularly long-term, are extremely underweight. With bulimia, most of the people who are struggling with this are relatively normal weight, at least in the beginning. It causes a lot of health issues, erosion of the enamel in your teeth, electrolyte imbalance, and that can lead to a lot of serious problems. A lot of the first things you see are the eroding of the teeth. So the breakdown of the enamel, particularly in the front teeth, and also like fingernails and things like that, tend to be good indicators, as that also gets eroded by the stomach acid. Kidney failure, cardiac problems, heart attacks, seizures. Most of these things due to the electrolyte imbalances, and also just the poor nutrition that goes along with some of the eating disorders. So intestinal problems, just permanent colon damage that can result from this type of binging and purging. So again, very serious health issues. Most are very concerned with their body shape and are fearful of gaining weight. And that's true of anorexia, as we'll talk about in a minute. And a lot of these folks have comorbid psychological issues, depression, anxiety, even substance use. And anorexia is similar in many ways, but has some sort of unique characteristics here. First of all, none of the binging. This is a severe restriction of calorie intake. People with anorexia may consume very little food throughout a day, hundreds of calories. The standard recommendations for diets, 2,000 calories a day. You may have someone who has just a few hundred calories a day. It's that severely restricted. And the thing you really see here is extreme marked weight loss. Very obvious, very noticeable, sometimes very fast. And it's usually 15% below your ideal body weight. So pretty significant. And often that's on the low end. So very often you'll see people who have who are much lower than 15% below their normal body weight. And again, the same as with bulimia, this intense fear of gaining weight and fear of losing control over eating. Just this, your textbook says it this way, this relentless pursuit of thinness. And I think that's a very good way to put it. And often it starts innocently enough with just dieting. And then these individuals get more and more restrictive, diet more and more, and it becomes more of a lifestyle. So it starts out with just, a basic diet to try to lose weight. Any number of reasons why people want to lose weight. Talk about that here in a minute. With some of the features, a disturbance in body image. We see a person who is anorexic as being very, very thin. And you'll see this in the video. There is this extreme focus on being thin. There is this extreme distortion in body image, so that when this person looks in a mirror, they're typically going to see a person who is overweight, even when that isn't the case in reality. So you or I may see this person and say, they're extremely thin, dangerously thin, and probably need to gain weight. But when they look in the mirror, they're not seeing that. They have this distorted body image. And that's very hard to treat. When you talk about it from a treatment standpoint, when a person looks in the mirror and they don't see what you see, it's very hard to convince them that it's not true. So it can be very, very difficult. Probably I'd have to, I'm just saying this kind of off the cuff, but I believe it's true. It's probably one of the harder disorders to treat, in that you have a lot of things working against you. Unlike schizophrenia, which might carry some similar distorted image type things, this isn't treated by medication in the same way. It's a different mechanism. So when I'm treating, my treatment is primarily attacking the maladaptive thoughts or the unreasonable thoughts. But that's very hard because this is a lifestyle. It's something that's gone on for years. And there is very much a distrust of other people's viewpoints. So just very, very difficult to treat. We'll talk about treatment here in a second. It's one of the most deadly disorders. It can kill you. It will kill you if it goes on long enough. You're starving your organs. Your body needs food to operate. And if you take that away, then you end up with sort of organ failure. Your body starts to shut down. Your kidneys start to shut down. Your heart starts to shut down. And often this can lead to heart attack and ultimately death. It's very physically taxing. Wears your body down, and you kind of get a shutdown of the organ system, one system at a time. But this is definitely something that you have to be careful of in terms of not letting go on too long without treatment, because you can have irreparable damage. Binge eating disorder is a new disorder in the DSM-5. Truth be told, it's something that we've all known has existed, but never really put a name on. And this is just it's similar to bulimia in looking at the binging, but without the purging. So you have the extreme bouts of binge eating, consuming large amounts of food in a short period of time, often associated with stress. And you don't have the purging, none of the vomiting, none of the laxative use, none of the extreme amounts of exercise. But it is associated with a lot of the distress and guilt and sort of depression, higher rates of comorbidity with some other disorders like depression and anxiety. And it really is a sort of a coping mechanism. Think about, we haven't talked about substance use yet. We will in a couple of weeks, but think about, everybody's familiar with binge drinking, and this is very similar except with food. Consuming very large amounts of food over a very short amount of time. Some have concerns with their weight, not all. Again, this is often just sort of a stress thing. This tends to develop later in life. So people who struggle with binge eating disorder tend to be older. And there's more psychopathology. What that means is more of other disorders, more depression, more anxiety, more body dysmorphic disorder, just more other comorbidities. So if we were in person, I would ask you if that makes sense, but we're not. So just tell me if it doesn't. For the 6 of you who are watching this, if you're watching this, I thank you. I appreciate it. I put a lot of time into this, so it is. I do like seeing feedback on these. Just in terms of how common this stuff happens, most individuals with bulimia or anorexia are female. That's not surprising to anyone, and you can think of the reasons why. I'll deviate a little bit from my notes here, but think of the reasons why. We talk about this being a sort of a westernized disorder. There's a lot of focus on body image and attractiveness, and we often associate thinness with attractiveness. In TV shows and commercials and movies, often the attractive people are thin. Very rarely do you have overweight people or people who do not meet our standard definitions of what attractive are. You're surrounded by TV commercials and magazine articles and just our own personal bias on what is attractive. And so that societal pressure to be thin is real. And it's stronger for women than men. First of all, it starts earlier. And so I talked about this being a disorder that starts early on and sort of develops as you age. And part of the reason is the influence of all of those pressures is much more intense for young girls than it is for young boys. For boys, men tend to struggle more with anorexia than bulimia, and often these are athletes, or you often see it in groups, like jockeys, who have to be a certain weight. You see it in wrestlers who have to meet a certain weight, and they may also engage in some of that binging and purging in order to meet their weight goals. But I've known a few like high school wrestlers over the years who've gone on to struggle with eating disorders later in life after developing this pattern of behavior related to eating. So it's predominantly female, but it can be male, and it's often athletes who struggle with this. Bulimia is 90% plus female. Again, onset's typically in adolescence, and the lifetime prevalence is about 1% for women, 0.1% for men. So men are much less. Just point of reference, schizophrenia is about 1%. Remember, like generalized anxiety disorder, it's roughly 12 to 14%. So it's less common than an anxiety disorder, but about the same amount of prevalence as something like schizophrenia. But in your particular age group, prevalence is a little higher. So we're talking about 6 to 7% of college age people suffer from an eating disorder. So much more common. You're sort of at the high risk, in one of the high risk groups for dealing with this. And left unattended, this really can cause a lot of health consequences and ultimately be fatal. In terms of anorexia, the majority, again, are white. Most are from middle or upper class. Again, it usually develops in adolescence, and it's more chronic and resistant to treatment than bulimia. And again, the lifetime prevalence is about the same, about 1%. And, I jumped the gun a little bit, but the media is a huge influence in terms of how we portray attractiveness, and thinness is more often linked to success and happiness. We have a lot of dieting. There's always the newest fad diet, the keto diet, or the, Weight Watchers, or which has rebranded themselves to something else that I can't remember. But there's always some kind of diet, the juice diet, the grapefruit diet. You could probably list off a dozen different diets. But there's this huge emphasis on diet. Everybody's always dieting. I am too. I've been on like 1 million diets over the years. There's this sort of a partial genetic component. Some of this does tend to run in families, but also you have to take into consideration the environmental aspect of that too. Could it just be observing maladaptive ways of dealing with food or body image? There is some evidence that deficits in serotonin may contribute to binging, and so that certainly can be a genetic factor. Also, just in terms of the psychological causes, low sense of control or needing to be in control are often associated with eating disorders, particularly with anorexia. Distorted body image and just preoccupation with food. Also, mood intolerance, or the having a hard time regulating your mood can lead to sort of this inappropriate relationship with food, maladaptive. Let's see, we talked about some of this stuff already, so I'm going to skip past it. You don't know what I'm skipping past, but I'm going through the PowerPoints here. Some of the treatments for this. Predominantly, we're dealing with cognitive behavioral therapy because you're looking at a disorder that centers around maladaptive thoughts related to food, so it only stands to reason that we would look at attacking those and replacing those with more adaptive ways of thinking or feeling about food. So cognitive behavior therapy is our treatment of choice. We look at identifying those patterns of behavior about food and about your weight and health, and then gradually learn new habits. This also creates a great deal of anxiety, so you also have to throw in some of the behavioral components with teaching ways to lower your stress levels and to deal with some of the distress that comes along with trying to have these big wholesale changes. Just think how difficult it is for you to go on a diet or give up something you like. Say you are a daily coffee drinker. It creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress to give up coffee, as it's a big deviation. And then just so extend that out and think about how important food is to us as individuals, and how you're asking a person to change everything they think and believe and do about food. And so it really is very taxing and creates a lot of anxiety and stress. And it's very hard to stick to it. A lot of people who engage in treatment for these disorders end up quitting, or it takes multiple sessions. And you'll see some of that in the video. Just something to think about as you're watching. Some antidepressants can help stop the binging and purging, but it's not really effective long term. It is really a disorder where medications can only be used sort of temporarily, treat some of the symptoms in the moment, but you really need wholesale changes about the way you're thinking. Let's see. Also, the importance of family therapy. Your textbook doesn't really get into this, but you'll see more of it in the video. But this is really a family disorder. And what I mean with this is a lot of people, most people who have anorexia have this. We did mention the need for control, and also that, and often that comes in the form of having a family where you feel very much not in control. You tend to have over controlling parents, not a lot of freedom, a lot of pressure coming from your family. And so anorexia, or controlling your food intake, often becomes a way of exerting some control. And so often these are when you're treating these disorders, you have to look at treating the family unit. So we have a lot of groups related to interpersonal communication in the family, improving communication with parents or siblings or anyone else who's involved in your life on an ongoing basis. The very basic thing we're looking to do with this type of treatment is just restore your weight to health, not even a healthy level, just get you moving up the scale. So I want to put some pounds on you. And you'll hear a little bit about this in the video, I think. I'm pretty sure they talk about this. But one of the truisms, I guess, is that it's hard to lose weight if you're starving yourself. Your body starts eating not fat cells, starts eating protein and muscles. And so it is easier to lose weight if you are actually taking in enough calories. You actually have to have some fat in your diet, some carbs, and you have to have something for your body to consume. And so if you're starving yourself, it makes it hard to maintain any kind of weight loss. So one of the things that you start teaching is that working with dietitians or nutritionists who can teach you appropriate ways to eat and still maintain a healthy weight, but not starve your body. So you want to you want to restore your weight, you want to put pounds back on, but you want to do it in a healthy way. What you don't want to do is do something that's very discouraging to the person and replace one disorder with another. So replacing this anorexia with obesity, because that also isn't healthy. So a lot of what we're doing here is education. teaching the clients about things like nutrition and appropriate ways to eat and look at food, and that this is often just a side effect or a symptom of something else, dealing with depression or anxiety or grief or loss or your need for control. And are there other things that we can do to help meet that need? Long-term prognosis is pretty bad, and it's really because it is that lifelong chronic disorder, and it's hard to stick to. It's easy to give up. It's really hard to stick in there and continue to do all of these treatments. So the video very much is about anorexia and bulimia, particular anorexia, but I think all of the things that you'll hear about in there can be sort of extrapolated to the other. They're similar enough. Obesity is sort of a new, well, not a new disorder. It's a disorder that's been around a long time, but we start putting increased emphasis on it because it is such a huge problem in our country. And statistics here, 2008, 33% of the adults in the United States were obese, 37% in 2010. If you've watched the news at all over the last couple of days, not talking politics here, because I don't want you all to turn me off and say I'm never taking that guy's class again. But you can't turn on the TV without hearing about our president being obese, and that being one of the reasons he's such high risk for his now positive coronavirus. He's not alone. When you talk about nearly 40% of people in the United States in 2010, that's a huge amount, and that's not going down. We're now in 2020, and I would venture to bet that we're closer to 50% than we are going down. So obesity is a huge problem. And this causes a lot of problems health-wise. So we have higher rates of diabetes and heart disease and all of the things that are associated with poor health, poor eating choices. And it's also growing more rapidly in children and adolescents. So it's something that we have to worry about in many ways. We have to worry about for ourselves, but we also have to worry about that for our children, because they're seeing us, they're seeing the other people in society and their food choices and their maladaptive ways of dealing with food. They don't even realize many times. I will say my children probably have no idea that you can cook your own food or grow your own food. They just think it comes from, McDonald's or, one of those places. It's very difficult to teach good health choices related to food if you're not demonstrating them. And I'm not talking bad about anybody, because I'm as guilty as anybody else for that. It's fast and it's easy. And that is part of the reason that we have created such a culture where this is such a problem. Also, we don't get up and till the fields like we used to, and we don't go walk. You ever hear your grandparents talking about walking 12 miles to school every day? I barely walk to the car or the bus. We are just not as physically active. I sit at my desk for 8 hours a day. I come home and I sit around some more. We are in more sedentary positions. We do less. We're less active. So it only stands to reason when you combine that with the increase in cheap, easy to get, not healthy food, that it stands to reason that our obesity rates are going to increase. There's a graph in here that looks at mortality rates and BMI. It's lethal to be overweight. It will cause health problems. Your level of obesity certainly has something to do with that. There's a couple of strange things like obesity and night eating. There's a segment of people who get up in the middle of the night and eat. More realistically, a good portion of people eat a third of their calories after dinner. I'm one of those people. I don't eat a lot throughout the day. I'm obese. Um, I consume most of my calories after I get home from work. So, the back half of my day is sort of where I get most of my food intake from. Not healthy. Definitely not healthy. A lot of these folks who struggle with this skip breakfast in the morning. They may get up and eat in the night. I used to do this like when my child was a lot younger and I would get up with him. I would get up and eat in the middle of the night, and I put on pounds really fast, and it was very quick to figure that out. Your body sort of shuts down at night, so it's not processing food the way it does during the day, so it's easier for those calories to stay around a while. Also, we think about technological advancements when we talk about obesity. We can spend all day long on our computer. You don't even have to go to get up off your couch to go to class anymore. You can sit right here and listen to me. I didn't have to get up off my bed to come do this lecture for you. So sort of the world that we live in contributes to us being more lazy, more sedentary, but also genetics is a factor. It's no surprise to you if you're overweight. Look around. You're not the only one in your family. There is a genetic predisposition to this. Also, you have to take into consideration the fact of watching your parents or grandparents or other family members deal with food in a maladaptive way, and you've picked up those habits. So it is both of those things. Treatment for obesity, man, you've seen it. It's like it's a mixed bag. Some people do really well. Other people kind of bounce up and down with their weight. And it's sort of this lifelong struggle. We talk about anorexia and bulimia being a lifelong struggle, so is obesity. You're constantly dealing with gaining and losing weight. The best treatments tend to go for things like teaching moderation and portion control and more education about nutrition and what you should have in your body and what you shouldn't, and incorporating some exercise. What doesn't really work are these crash diets where you lose a lot of weight really fast by doing something that you can't maintain long term. Unless you can really work out 7 days a week for 2 hours a day, you shouldn't take that on as your primary way to lose weight. It's just not attainable, and you're going to stop. You're going to burn yourself out. You have to have something that you continue long term. So, usually our first step is some of this self-directed weight loss stuff, and then we some stuff we read online, and then we go to the second step, things like Weight Watchers, some of the commercial available stuff, and then we get into if that doesn't work, your next step would be to do more behavior modification type programs. And if that doesn't work, sort of the last step is bariatric surgery, which, generally I would not recommend unless it's unless your health's on the line, unless it's sort of something where if you don't lose weight quickly and you're struggling to do that, you're going to die. Then you want to pursue other avenues first. So I told you I was going to keep that brief, and I think 38 minutes is pretty brief, but I do want you to spend time watching the video. Your assignment this week is going to be about dying to be thin, and I will post that video. Also, the link to this probably tomorrow when it's available. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to email me. Your midterm grades should be posted by the time you see this. I need to get those in tonight. So by the time you see this video, they should be posted. This is just what I've graded up until this point. If you have any questions about that or see things that you think you've turned in that I haven't scored, shoot me an email, let me know. I can fix that. I can go back and look, or we can, figure out what went wrong. So hope you have a good week. And if you have any questions or want to chat, just feel free to email me or drop a comment on the discussion board. All right. Thanks. Have a good week.